right, guys, by popular demand, let's do some fan questions.
What's up, Chael? Two questions for you. Number one, we see now Dustin Poirier was able to get that guillotine choke on Khabib there. Probably the most trouble he's ever been in his whole career. I mean, he's in serious trouble there. But how do you think when Khabib goes up against Tony Ferguson, how it's going to be? Because Tony's able to land these Darce chokes, whether he's on the bottom or he's on top. And second question, how do you think it would be if Tony Ferguson's able to cut him up and have him bleeding? How do you think Khabib deals with that adversity? Thank you.
Well, okay, so I like that question because when you're really complimenting Khabib, in many ways you're talking about Superman who has one kryptonite that we've ever possibly seen, which is he was briefly caught in what appeared to be a tight guillotine choke. I mean, that's a real compliment to a guy who's fought 28 times, won world championships, headline shows, and for one brief moment looked like maybe he was losing blood flow. And by the way, he did it and got out of it. Big compliment, but your comparison to Ferguson is very good. Here's the thing that Ferguson does. Ferguson will ground and pound from the bottom. It's never been done before that I've ever seen to a high level by a recognized fighter. Tony Ferguson won a world championship. Don't forget the night he won it, he had a triangle choke, but he was giving elbow. He was ground and pounding from the bottom. That's where Ferg becomes a problem. So it leads into your second question, which is what is Khabib going to do when he's cut up? When he's taken out, I don't know. I have never seen anything from Khabib to make me believe, oh, he's going to wilt and shut down. That isn't what I would hypothesize, and I don't think you would either. But if you were to speculate that Tony Ferguson is going to give him problems wherever that fight goes, you are right. You are absolutely right. Tony's going to be very hard to take down. Khabib's takedowns are very powerful and effective, but if you watch and study some tape on him, he's not a great wrestler. Chael, that didn't go hand in hand. What do you mean? Well, wrestling's done in the open. If you go look at a wrestling mat, be it in high school, the NCAA, the World Championships, the Olympic Games, there are no walls. There are no fences. It's done in the open. Khabib, in the open, struggled with Conor McGregor, who's never wrestled before. He struggled, and I believe failed 100% of the time with Al Iaquinta. Once he pushes you to the fence, he starts to maul you. He's just fantastic there. It's a different level of wrestling. His grappling is different. Everything he does in the open is to push you backwards. Why? Because eventually you can only go back so far. You hit the fence, and that's when he goes to work. I don't know that Tony would be different than anybody else in dealing with that power, in dealing with Khabib's ability to get you there. But don't ever forget, and people do all the time, Tony Ferguson is a national champion, first place champion wrestler. He has a tattoo on his body of the USA Wrestling emblem. And this is a guy who understands wrestling. Then when you get Tony down, you're not out of the forest. Even guys that think they understand submission work, for a large part of MMA, 99% possibly even, if you get a guy down, it is now a game of my top control and my ground and pound versus your escapes and your submissions. That is now the game you're playing. Not with Tony. Tony will get the ground and pound going from the bottom. He'll bring knees into your ribs. He'll bring heels into your butt. He'll bring elbows into your nose. Oh, and by the way, to your first point, he'll be trying to strangle you the whole time he's doing that. It's a very interesting match, and there's really no spot where you can go, well, they keep it on their feet, or, well, if they get it down. That narrative's a little bit boring, but as fight fans, we have to buy into it. We have to buy into it because that's the sport that we're watching. It is generally as simple as that. If it stays on the feet, it favors this guy. If it goes to the ground, it favors this guy. Not with Tony. Not with Tony. His style is different. He will ground and pound from the bottom.
Hey, Chael. My name is Rashawn. Huge fan. Love your videos. My question is, if you could create your own perfect fighter, what would you take from today's fighters?
Well, to create a perfect fighter, that's actually something I've thought of many times. Many times, not just recently, over the history of the sport. I mean, I can remember when certain guys came on and they revolutionized the sport. I mean, even at the very beginning where I'd never seen it before, what Royce Gracie was doing as the smaller man and from the bottom and from a grappling standpoint, nobody knew could be a dominant form of self-defense, or in the way Royce used it, of self-offense, right? We all thought it was about the striker and who can hit who and who's going to knock who out, and these types of things. You then eventually, around 1996, had a gentleman who came in named Marco Huas, who was said to be equal on the feet as he was on the ground. And he was. He was a guy who could go to the ground and submit you. He could keep you on your feet and get you out of there with the punches and the kicks. And Marco Ruas, who never gets enough credit, was really the first guy to make everybody stand back, open their eyes, and go, oh my gosh, you don't have to be locked in and show loyalty to your own craft. This is a new craft. It's called mixed martial arts. And if you're a wrestler, you don't have to just think about what am I going to do against a striker. If you're you need to go and learn the strike. And oh, by the way, if you're a striker, you don't have to think, well, what am I going to do if I run into a grappler? You need to become that grappler. And based off of largely what Marco Ruas showed us, it inspired guys like Maurice Smith to come over and start to be this more complete athlete. I have seen guys with unique techniques, specifically from the karate world. Machida comes to mind, Stephen Thompson comes to mind, but some of these guys who are very unique. Even Conor McGregor has a bit of a Taekwondo karate mixed in with Muay Thai stance and demeanor about himself. But when you have a unique style, unique weapons that the audience hasn't seen, the announcers haven't seen, that means your opponent hasn't seen it. And the guys that revolutionize any sport, but particularly this one, are guys that come in with just a nuance that we just haven't seen before. If you haven't seen it, that means there's no defense for it. And that means you're going to have some good effectiveness. So I would always encourage the guys. Uriah Faber is one of these guys who's always creating. He's always being innovative. He's coming at, sometimes it's something weird. Sometimes he fails. But most of the time, it lands. It sticks. It's unique.
Hey, Chael. Brett from South Florida. So on November 2nd, we got the West Coast Gangster versus the East Coast Gangster. But I want to know who the American Gangster would put his money on if he was a betting man, but I want to know why. Is it the flying knees of Masvidal, or is it the Stockton slaps of Nate Diaz? Who's going to win? How are they going to do it? What do you think? Thanks for everything you do. Appreciate the content, man.
Well, if I was to give you a prediction for what to expect in that fight, I think first off, okay, let's back up to the press conference as a matter of fact, because this is relevant. You've got two bad guys. You've got two heels in the sport, and you have a press conference that is a complete dud. Well, that's not necessarily what I saw, right? I saw some respect, some honor amongst thieves up there, but don't forget you're also dealing with two counterpunchers. Nate Diaz has never historically come out of his shell in a verbal assault until he gets attacked first. Masvidal is also a counterpuncher. Masvidal doesn't go out and stick a finger in somebody's face. Masvidal waits till there's a finger stuck in his face and then he reaches up and breaks it. So neither guy fired that first shot to get the other guy off the stool. With that said, if you think for a moment that anything in these guys' history is going to lead to a lackluster affair, you're just wrong. I think favoring Nate Diaz is conditioned. I think favoring Masvidal is the fact that he's been so active and so busy. I think favoring Nate Diaz is the fact that he has closed out shows before and he is part of the 5-round club. As much as Masvidal has done in the sport, he's never been given that opportunity. Is 5 rounds, is the main event, is being in Madison Square Garden something that could rattle Masvidal? Is it something that could create a pressure? And whenever we talk about pressure, guys, you hear that word thrown out. Who gives a goddamn about pressure? Well, I'll tell you who does. An endurance athlete. All pressure will do for you in competition is cause fatigue. It will cause you to tire out faster. There's a reason, and most of you can relate, whatever sport you played even as a kid. You could go to practice and do whatever that sport was for an hour and a half, 2 hours, and never be exhausted. Now, you go in on game day, you play for 6 minutes, you're shot. Hey, coach, get me out of here. I got to get something to drink. Let me sit on the bench for a minute, right? I mean, that's a very real thing. Well, what's the difference on game day? It's the same exact activity you just did for 2 hours. The difference is pressure, is stress. And what does pressure or stress do? They create fatigue. I also, as much as I say that, do not predict for you that it's going to affect Masvidal in any way. But I think when you look at this, if you're looking for some variables and maybe some outsider chance here, we know that Nate loves long fights. We know that. We know Masvidal can come out and stick him fast and hard and early. We know that those things don't seem to bother Nate, that he's good at pushing through, that he knows how to weather a storm. It just seems like you keep going back and forth. If you were to try to argue your favorite superhero in this fight, you would constantly run into blocks that the other guy can counter, things the other guys have seen. It is a bit of a wash. Much like the press conference was very close and even, I think the fight is going to be very long. I think it's going to be very close. I think it's going to be very even. I think that Masvidal is much better precision striker than Diaz. I predicted the same thing about Pettis. I think I'm right in my assessment of Pettis, but Diaz doesn't show you that. If you go back and watch that Pettis fight, I don't think you guys realize how many hard cracks Diaz took. I don't think you saw it. He never wobbled his knees. He never backed up. He never stopped throwing his own punches. It looked as though it was an easy night for him. It was not. It was not. He just weathered the storm.
Hey, Chael, I got a question about this Dominic Reyes Chris Weidman fight coming up. So, Chris Weidman, right, he beat Anderson Silva in one of the biggest upsets of all time. Now, imagining he beats Dominic Reyes, he would then be positioned to beat John Jones, again, for probably one of the biggest upsets of all time. If he did this, would he be considered the best, I guess, underdog fighter of all time? Let me know your thoughts.
Well, I suppose. I don't know that being the best underdog fighter is ever a title or a claim that Chris Weidman or any other athlete ever went after, but those would be two very meaningful wins. I'll back you up. The night he beat Anderson Silva was a big surprise to the public. Everybody in the back predicted Chris Weidman would beat Anderson Silva. You could not find a fighter on the roster unless they were a close friend that would say, look, I think Anderson's going to win. And even they didn't mean it, but they just had to say it. I'm just reminding you of that time. Weidman's skills and where Weidman was at in his career were greatly different than Anderson. Weidman went out and showed that. That was not a close fight, the very first one. Anderson had done some goofy movements. Weidman put him down. The only thing that seemed to be remembered was the goofy movements, and had Anderson not done those, then Chris Weidman would not have got the jump on him. That was not a competitive fight, so they went out and fought again. That was not a competitive fight. It ended in a very, very bad injury for Anderson. So again, the only takeaway from that was the leg injury, not the previous moments. All in, those guys fought about 16 minutes. Of those 16 minutes, Chris Weidman won at least 15 minutes and 50 seconds of it. That just wasn't a competitive match. It was a style problem. In many ways, it was just a style problem. Anderson went off in both fights a 2.5-to-1 favorite. That was stunning. Stunning because all the guys in the back knew, all the experts knew who was going to win that fight. But then once it was revealed to the world who the better fighter was, people still went to the window and thought Anderson could win because they could only remember him screwing around at the end and catching that shot. For dismissing the previous 7 minutes and 30 seconds where Weidman dominated. It was just a bad matchup. That would not happen to Weidman when he went into John Jones. The boys in the back would not think he's going to go beat John Jones. The fans would not think he's going to go beat John Jones. He would not go off at a 2.5-to-1 underdog. He would go off as a 4.5-to-5-to-1 underdog. However, he still has shown that he can throw that ball. He can throw the Hail Mary pass. Put me in, coach, when the going gets tough. There is a story there. Those guys are both from New York. Those guys are both wrestlers. They have a little chatter back in the day. Back when they were both champions before champ and leaving your division was even a thing. Weidman went up to this weight class to fight John Jones. He didn't go up because he doesn't want to make 185 anymore. He went up because he wants to fight for the title. He knows who's got it. It's John Jones. There's something there. Would I predict for you that this is the great hope that's going to come in and surprise? No, I would be very much surprised. But I would also make sure that I was very much tuning in to see that match.
What's up, Chael? Big fan of the show. Damn near a daily listener. To keep it short and sweet, question for you would be about becoming a judge. How do you become a judge? What would be the requirements to become a judge? Because from what I hear, most of these judges don't even have, MMA experience. So yeah, what is your take on becoming a MMA judge?
Okay, so nobody loves this answer about judges. But it is the answer, and it's actually a very good answer. The first thing to become a judge, you got to be a solid guy. Honestly, they will do a background check. They'll ask you some questions. Are you a reasonable person? Do you show up places on time? Are you dependable? Can we count on you? Do you want to do this? Are you a fan of the sport? Have you studied it? Okay, great. That will be the starting point. Then, are you willing to work your way up? We have a small amateur show this Saturday. Can we count on you to be there? Okay, great. Guy shows up, You see the fights, he turns in his cards. How do his cards look? They look pretty good. I'm going to sit down with him in the back anyway. I'm the commissioner. I'm going to sit down with him in the back. I see you had this round 10-9 for the blue corner. Tell me why. And he'll say why he had it 10-9. And you have this round 10-9 the other way. I agree with you. I think that you had it right. But tell me why you had that. And it'll be a little bit of this. You want to make sure that a guy has thought. You want to make sure that a guy is aware, that he doesn't have a bias, that he just understands the sport. People don't love that answer that, oh, there should be training, there should be classes, there should be videos, and there should be no, there shouldn't. There should not be that. Not only should there not be a curriculum, there isn't a curriculum, but you don't want one put in place because the sport is very objective. And you need to be able to know what you're seeing at the time. I can remember a number of years ago with a judge who, if I named him, you'd all know his name. Now, I remember being in the rules meeting, and he was talking about judging a fight, and he was talking about the takedown specifically, and said, well, if a wrestler's taking on a kickboxer and the wrestler takes the kickboxer down, I'm not really going to care, because that's what he does. But if the kickboxer takes a wrestler down, well, I know right there that's not where the wrestler wants to be, and I'm going to score that. You go, hey, wait, a takedown's a takedown. The guy's background or his history or what he said about him in the meet has nothing to do with it. A takedown is a takedown, just by example. And that judge went on. He's still judging to this day. And he said about 4 other things in the meeting. I was 25 years old. I'm standing in the back of the room going, no, that's not right. None of what you're saying is right. So the first thing that a commission would want to know, first, raise your hand, say you want to do it. They'll do a background check. They'll talk to you. Then they'll give you an opportunity. And you're going to start small. It's not going to be great. There's not a bunch of pay that comes with this and travel opportunities. This is about people with passion, who love the sport, who believe they have an eye for it, and above everything else, have an integrity to call it the way that they see it. If you can do that, and you then get called in the back room by the executive director who asks you to qualify why you scored around the way you did, and you can make an argument. You objectively can say, well, this is what I saw. This was the damage I saw. This was the pressure that I saw. This was the amount of tax that I saw versus the other side of the coin. If you can do that, you're likely to be able to be a judge over time. You'll move from the amateurs to small professional shows over time, right? You'll start to have paper and a history and a reputation behind you. Not for nothing, being a good, solid person that takes those calls, is willing to get in a car, drive up the road several hours to an event because the executive director needs you. It's not all about sitting and judging Floyd Mayweather. It's not all about sitting and judging GSP's next fight. There's a lot of lifting. There's a lot of camaraderie. There's a lot of effort. But above everything, it is just a willingness. People don't love that answer. There's not a school for it. It is going to be trial by fire. If an executive director believes in you and wants to take a chance on you, they will put you in a show. If you screw up, they will not put you in another show. That is the checks and balances.
Hello, Chael. This is Bishan from Nepal, and I have a question for you. Like, what is the difference between the fighting style of Khabib and the fighting style of Guzman? I feel that they're kind of same but kind of different. Can I elaborate about this? Thank you.
The difference in the fighting style between Khabib and Kamaru. First off, you want to know a fight that would be a super close fight? You just named it. A really, really close fight. And maybe having some pounds and some size for Guzman helps balance that out, but it does balance it out. I must tell you, I never knew how good Kamaru was until he fought Woodley. I knew Kamaru was really good. I knew he was really talented. I watched him beat former world champions. I watched his record. He's like 15-1. I watched him come through the toughest tournament in all sports. I was a total believer. I didn't know he was that good. I simply did not know. I did not know he could push the pace that hard. I did not know he could get to his positions. I did not know he could close distance. I didn't know he could deal with some of the strikes he was taking, the way he could roll and fire back. I didn't know he was that good. I saw Kamaru after that fight. We interviewed him on the set of ESPN. And he came up and I said hello, and I felt like I got a cold shoulder from him. And I said something about him. We weren't on TV yet. I said, hey, am I sensing something here? And he said, yeah. He said, I've been listening to you all week. He said, you never once predicted me. And I felt like, you were a little salty towards me. I said, Kamaru, I woke up today believing you were the second baddest man alive. I will wake up tomorrow knowing you are the baddest man alive. There is no way either one of those can be an insult. And he goes, Yeah, okay, you're right. And then everything was cool after that. But when you talk about the style that Kamaru would bring with Khabib, it is very close. Khabib does such a good job of holding guys on the fence. He never gets credit for that. People don't really understand what Khabib's doing and some of the nuances he's doing. And the way when he wants to drag somebody off a fence, he steps behind their knee as opposed to reaching down and pulling them off, which is just an uphill battle. He steps behind the knee, he drags, he gets distance, he reattacks. He really doesn't get credit for when he's on top, the way he's trapping legs, pinning legs down. Khabib is doing some traps from his top game that have never been done, never shown. We will go into practice rooms and coaches will go, okay, this is the Khabib. This is a young athlete. Many ways, possibly young in his career. I know so many people think he's got 3 or 4 left and he's out the door, but possibly young in his career, who already has techniques named after him. I have been in this sport 33 years. Now, that includes my amateur wrestling career, but 33 years in this sport, fighting since 1997 competitively. I don't have a better answer for some of these moves. I call him the Khabib too. It's the first guy to go out and do them. So if you can avoid putting your back on a fence, your probability of doing well with Khabib goes way up. That may sound simple to keep your back off a fence, but a matador thinks it's simple to stop a bull as well. When he's coming at you and he's charging and he's bigger than you, it's tough.